Right. Well, so when Bill asked me to jump in and do this, I thought, oh, this could be quite interesting. So we're talking about, and again, when we're now on Zoom meetings, that we've really only got the language, and a lot of body language, a lot of things are lost. So I thought, well, let's have a think about this. And when we look at the responsibility for communication, whose responsibility is it? Is it my responsibility to get across my message, or is it your responsibility to understand what it is I'm trying to say? And at the end of the day, it's both people have 100% responsibility for that communication. I love this this saying by Alan Greenspan. I know you think you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. And talking about, you know, that responsibility for communication, the meaning of the communication is the response you get. So if somebody comes back to you with something completely random, they've obviously taken a completely different meaning from what it is you were trying to communicate. And this reminds me when I'm going over to my mother-in-law's. My mother-in-law, they're lovely, and my brother-in-law still lives with his mum, but they're both fairly deaf. And we'll be there and we'll be having 3 different conversations, and then it'll be the same conversation. Then somebody will say something about something you'd said about 3 sentences previous. And so it can get really messy in the communication. So it's like, whose responsibility is it? And I just want to talk a little bit, and Adele, you'll be very familiar with this, about the NLP communication module. And as you know, I'm a trainer of neuro-linguistic programming, and it's all about how we use the language of our mind to create excellence and understand how we create our behaviors. And this model just shows that when we have an external event that happens, it comes in via all our senses. So our visual, auditory, our feelings, our tastes, and our smells. And because this information comes in at such a huge amount of information at a time, it's about 12 million bits of information a second, our minds just can't cope with it. And it goes, ah, and runs away. So our unconscious mind says, okay, look, I'll take over, just don't worry yourself. And it will filter this huge bit of information down by deleting, distorting, and generalizing it into 128 bits per second, give or take. And one of the ways that it does this is by using language, and it uses preferred methods of taking in events. So what I want to talk about today is one of the filters that the unconscious mind uses to delete all this massive information down into an understandable piece of information. And this understandable piece of information is our own reality, is our internal representation of that external event. And we'll all have a very different internal representation of each individual event. And this personal reality will create a different emotional state, a different physiology, and that will all create different behaviors. So I want to talk about today about how we process this external event. And people will have an individual preference to use a certain, what we call, modality. So they'll use visual, auditory, or kinesthetic as their main modes of operation. And you can notice what mode people are operating in and start to identify them. So it's something you can go away and have a play at when we've gone through them. And if you can learn to identify these modes and then match them, you can really build instant rapport. And you can get, you know, when people say, oh, I really feel like we're talking on the same page, we're talking the same language. This is how you can match and then you can then use your matching of their preference system to gain that instant bond and instant rapport. So I'm going to go really quickly through them, and then it's up to you to go and have a play. So people that have a visual preference, they'll memorize by seeing pictures. Typically, they'll stand and sit, maybe with their heads and bodies erect and eyes up. When we're looking at how we recall visual things and pictures, we'll tend to look a little bit up. So they'll tend to breathe from the top of the lungs. They'll often sit forward in the chair or on the edge of the chair. Tend to be more organized, neat, well-groomed and orderly. As they tend to be. They can be more deliberate and more appearance orientated, sometimes a bit quieter. They can be good spellers, and this is quite interesting, Bill, if you're talking about dyslexics. If somebody's dyslexic, you very often find that they'll try and spell kinesthetically instead of visually. If you can train them to look up when they're trying to think about how to spell, it'll actually improve dyslexics and spelling things. So it's an interesting little nugget of information. They'll memorize by seeing pictures, and say they're less distracted by noise. Very often will have trouble remembering verbal instructions and get very bored by long verbal instructions. And they'll be interested in how something looks or how someone looks at them. And they'll respond to being taken places, being bought things, and they'll use visual language. So they'll say, "I'll see you later. Well, that looks like a good idea. Can we focus on this? I want to be clear about how this is going to work out." And they want to know how things will look, the bigger picture. And so you can have a look at and you see yourselves in there. Does anybody think that, oh, that's me? No? I'm going to guess later who I think is what. But so visual people, and can be quite often breathing a little bit higher up. So auditory. So somebody who has an auditory preference will tend to move their eyes sideways or down and to the right. Down to the right, when we're looking at eye patterns, is where we think and bring back our own self-talk. And so when we're accessing our memory for auditory, we'll tend to look on a level with our ears. And they'll breathe more from the middle of their chest. They'll quite typically talk to themselves. And they can be quite distracted by other noises. And if they're talking to themselves, they'll quite often move their lips while they're talking, and you'll see them talking to themselves. They can really easily repeat things back to you. And they might find maths and writing more difficult, but spoken language a lot easier. And they like music and talking on the phone, and they'll learn by listening. They'll tend to memorize by steps, procedures, and sequence. And an auditory person will be often interested in being told how they're doing, getting feedback, and will respond to certain tone of voice, and the words that you use can be really important to them. And they'll pick up on, the words that you're using. And they'll, again, using auditory language, so they'll tend to use phrases like, oh, I can listen to that. Listen here. Talk to me. How are we speaking? Are we speaking on the same page? It's good to talk to you. That sounds like a really good idea. So thinking about how they would use their language, noticing whether you've got those auditory preferences in there. Then we go to kinesthetic. So this is people who are very much in touch with their feelings. And they'll very often talk, they'll breathe from the bottom of the lungs. So a lot of the time you talk about belly breathers, and you see the stomach going in and out as they breathe. They'll very often talk a bit slowly, and breathily. And they're very often a little bit more relaxed, so they're slumped over and can be talking, moving very slowly. Typically accessing feelings and emotions to get a feel for what they're doing. Respond to physical rewards and touching. So, kinesthetics have had a really tough time over this last 18 months because they've not been able to. And they'll tend to want to stand close to people, touch them, and very often physically oriented people. So they can be athletes, carers, and they can move a lot. Tends to be a bit slower, tend to memorize by doing or walking through something. So wanting to know how something works in practice. They'll be interested in something that feels right and using kinesthetic language. So I really want to get in touch with somebody and get a hold on a concrete feeling. I can really grasp the concept that you're talking, and let's get a handle on this. So really feeling how things are working. And so these are the main preferences for an individual. So visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. However, we do get people that are very olfactory or gustatory. And I don't know if you remember Hugh Grant in Amazing Hotels or something. He's a real olfactory person. He likes to smell everything. He'll even go up and sniff somebody's perfume, or he likes the smell of the hotel linen or leather and coffee. So some people, we talk about when you're selling a house, getting the smell of coffee or bread or something. And things like gustatory and olfactory is when Heston Blumenthal completely messes with your mind as something doesn't look like it, tastes like it, smells like it ought to feel like. So we can really confuse the unconscious mind by mixing and matching with these different preferences. But the auditory, visual, and kinesthetic are the major modes of operation. And when we talk about rapport and building rapport, we have lots of different things to work with. So posture, facial expressions, breathing, voice quality. The predicates are what we're talking about, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and self-talk, and key words. Again, with lockdown and not being able to face-to-face, we've lost quite a lot of our things there, but we can see that if we can understand the predicates that a person is using, we can match. So if they're breathing for our visuals, if you've got somebody that's talking to you that's a bit up here and they're talking like this, you can then quietly, if you're a kinesthetic type person, you're a bit more laid back, but you want to be in more rapport with this person, you can take yourself up, sit a little bit taller, lift your breathing, maybe speak a little more quickly. If you want to bring them back down to your level, you can then slowly lower your own tone of voice, lower your breathing, and bring them a bit down into the more kinesthetic side. So it's fun to have a look. I mean, these are not set in stone typically, and we will all be mixtures of all of the different types. But by noticing what people, how they're breathing, where they're breathing from, the types of words they're using, and being able to mix and match and mirror, then you're going to really instantly bringing a rapport with somebody, allowing you to do anything. And it's the most important skill on the planet, whether it's in life, love, business. So the basis of rapport is what people are like each other. So when they're like each other, they like each other. You don't have to be them, you don't have to change yourself, but by noticing and being able to get similarities, your people will then be able to give you whatever you want. And, you know, it's about remembering that, noticing things, being curious, noticing where you're coming from. And I must admit, I've noticed in myself, I used to be completely visual, very much so. But actually, as I've gone through more of my NLP training, and I did a lot of audio tape listening, and I used to hate it, but I'm actually getting a lot better at and working with that now. I'm noticing if I go to bed at night and I've had a busy day and I'm still a bit visual and I'm still up here and it's all going around in my head, if I can take my breathing down and be more kinesthetic in my belly breathing, it actually brings your calmness down, it brings your pace down, and it helps you go back off to sleep. And we use that in sports psychology as well with my riders, that we teach belly breathing, because by lowering your breathing, it lowers your calmness. And again, Adele, you'll know that with that, just bringing in that focus and bringing it back to your core, it just stills everything that's going on in your mind and everything that's whirling around. So it's really interesting to notice in self, as well as have a little look at other people. I mean, please don't stare at the chest and see where they're breathing from. You can get put away from that, but do it quietly. But listen for the words that they use and see. And so, guys, Bill, Adele, can you notice which have you got a preference? Do you think?
I think I'm kinesthetic. I think.
I was going to guess at that because you're always quite laid back and it's always there and yeah.
I'm auditory and kinesthetic, but a big bias on the auditory. But I'm definitely not visual. No. Definitely not. I think I have aphantasia. Not visual at all.
You see, when you're talking, actually, your eyes are disappearing up to the left and right.
Sorry, that's because you're on the left side of the screen. That's because of that. Yeah, no, I am actually staring at you there. I'm definitely, I don't see visuals, and not at all. It's great when I work with clients and you get these most visual descriptions, and I don't. It's like I'm listening to the radio in there, whereas other people might be watching telly. I just don't see the pictures.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting when we do the NLP practitioner courses and we go through what we're talking about, the eye patterns and where people access their information and how you can change that. And again, using the different preferences so that you can choose which mode of operation you work in to suit you better at that moment in time. And like you say, a lot of the NLP practice techniques can be highly visual. However, they do have the auditory sides listening to, and it's interesting as a visual working with an auditory and how you can change your practice to suit the person that you're working with, because obviously that rapport is instant. And in business and in interviews, again, if you can notice where somebody's operating from, you can get that instant rapport, which will then. So Bill, you have to get Alan on it.
Yeah, by that, yeah.
So
used on Zoom as well.
yeah, so I think that's about it. I just kept it really short, and say a few more of us, we could have had a bit more of an interaction. But I think it's really interesting watching how I like people watching. It's good to be curious.
Mm. But when you said about the relaxation, about the belly breathing, that tied in with the Tai Chi session we had.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, when working with like autistic or ADHDs, if we can just bring them down off the ceiling, so that they're up here but they can be quite disturbed by noise. So again, if they're auditory and they're very distracted by noise, again, if we can bring them back down into the more kinesthetic, because that's the bit that tends to be a bit more lacking in these people, and just allow them to access their more kinesthetic. And I say with dyslexics, if we can get them more up into a visual side of things, then that'll help them to be able to spell and use the written word.